Welcome back. In this video, we're going to go through the basic flags as part 2, as the second set of the more basic flags. Even though I consider these to be more of the basic flags, all the flags that we're going to cover in this video are dealing with the contexts and sessions. And so they are pretty straightforward to use, as we'll see here shortly, but they can be super powerful, super effective in ways that you don't even understand yet until you see it. But in this video, we're just going to get through these context and session related flags just to show the basic usage. And then in a very near future video, I'm going to go into how these things can be such game changers. You'll probably see when we list some things and list context files and list some sessions, you'll probably be able to connect some of the dots in front of you when you see some of these things. But we will really explore how you can use these features in great depth in a future video that I'm going to push to the top of the pile, to the top of the to-do file, so that I can get those to you sooner instead of later, because believe me, they're super interesting. So let's get right into it. We're going to go through some of these flags here that'll wrap up the basic, what I consider the basic level flags. So the first one is going to be the context flag. And you can use the -C. You could also use the context, and I believe this one has an equal sign, and then you would type the context out. And you know, actually, first, let's do the listing them. So it's for the short flag, it's the lowercase x, and this lists some of the context files that I have. Now, what I've done is one of the first things I did is I took the mfab readme, which is just the readme file. It's all of this from the repo, and I have that as a context file just to give some starter info for any kind of conversation based on the Fabric repo information. And then I also broke that mfab readme up into the 9 kind of what I consider the main sections as of right now. And so, you know, it makes it easy to ask specific questions about it. You'll see what I mean when we really get into this. But you can see how this becomes, you know, Daniel Miessler, I believe, had built something called a soul file, using it as a context file. And then there's some other things that naturally I go in my own direction with things. And so like the 7 whys. These are things that you could still use a pattern, but it preempts the pattern with a perspective, or you could do a personality. You could have it be your personality with a soul file. You could, have the Fabric tool, or using OpenAI, or going into a chatbot and create a soul file that is the antithesis of your own, to help you gain perspectives, different perspectives, and empathy for someone that is the opposite of you. I mean, think about the implications of that. So we'll just get into the using of this. So right here, Fabric -x, lowercase x, that lists the context files that we have. And real quick, those are located if you go into your Fabric configuration directory and you have a contexts folder, and this is where you would place those. And I just have them as regular text files, plain text files. And so you would create a text file and drop it into this folder, and then it'll be accessible with the context flags using the Fabric tool. Likewise, sessions would be created and they will get dropped in here. The Fabric tool, I believe, allows for creating sessions that don't exist, but the context flags, I believe they only search for existing context files as of now, I believe. I believe that's true. And so you would just create a context file and drop it in this directory, which is located here in the context folder, inside the Fabric folder, inside the .config folder of your home directory. Got it? Got it? Good. Moving on, we just did the Fabric listing the contexts, and that -x could also have been, -- list context. I think it's plural. Yes, that does the same thing. And so we'll clear the screen up here. The next one we'll explore real quick. If we're listing things, we'll do the -X. This could also be list sessions. You could type that, or just -X. And it lists a couple sessions here that we have. The demo session, hyperparameter session that I just created earlier, in anticipation of this video. And so those two flags, the -X and -X, those list your contexts and sessions. You can then go and use these things directly. So that would be using, typing in fabric dash capital C for context. This could also be dash dash context and an equal sign, I'm pretty sure. And then you would type out, the context here with no space between the context file name and the equal sign. Or you can just do dash capital C and then the context. So let's pick one. Let's relist the context and pick one. We'll pick the 7 whys, right? And demonstrate how that's used. And so this is pretty cool the way this works. We'll go in that future video. We'll go through what's in this 7 whys context file, and the soul file is a really cool one. But let's say that we ask the old worn question, why is the sky blue? And you don't need a pattern flag technically, as we've gone over, but if you're using the fabric tool, it makes sense to use some patterns. So, and we're going to keep this one so simple, you just using the raw query as we've done before, just to get, it's not exactly a bland response, but it's kind of a bland response, as you'll see. And so this is pretty typical of the why is the sky blue question. If we did the AI flag, it would limit it to 3 to 5 bullet points, I'm pretty sure. But it always brings up the molecules in the atmosphere. It should say Rayleigh scattering somewhere. It usually says Rayleigh scattering. It might not this time. Yeah, it's right here. It talks about Rayleigh scattering. That's very typical to be brought up with this question, right? And so let's try this. We'll put in the context flag to pull up a context, and we'll put in 7 whys and watch what this does. So why is the sky blue? Scattering of sunlight. Why? Short wavelengths. Why? Atmospheric gases. Why? The reason atmospheric gases, yada yada. Why? The configuration of atomic orbitals and nitrogen. And then it gets to Rayleigh scattering. And you could run this a couple times. I've gotten to do this a little differently each time. And sometimes it'll go off on different tangents, drilling down to the way that the cones work in your eyes to receive color and electromagnetic whatever that is, where light bounces off of matter and things like that. It gives you a totally different type of response, putting this context before the pattern. And we can take a look at that real quick with a dry run, and you'll see that the first thing sent to the LLM payload is the 7 whys, and it's got an example in there. And then it begins after that with the pattern, the raw query pattern, and then the little inline question I gave it. Now, this is the most ridiculously simple example I could think of, and you can imagine how, say you're using Summarize or any of the multitude 200 plus patterns and how detailed they get. And then you have some sort of in some way significant body of text that you're running the pattern on. And you're preempting all of this with the 7 whys. You see how you begin to use AI in a totally different way. Now, yes, you can do all of this in a chat box inside of, ChatGPT or a local chatbot interface. But it's really, really cumbersome. It's more work to do this sort of thing through those interfaces than it is with the fabric tool. It's just totally different, more cumbersome than using this, because this fabric tool, this command could also be, sections of it can be shortened up with aliases. You could alias 7 whys to fabric-c 7 whys, and then you pipe a file to redirect a file into it, add any pattern that you want to it after that. You see the power of this. And then if you ever take that, like this command with aliases to shorten it, and then use that in scripting for automation and looping through files and or patterns, the power of this that you can condense or distill to the stroke of a key. It's just something like you can accomplish with a simple command, running a bash script, running all of this and all the various breadth and depth layers that you can do. You can distill to the stroke of a key what would take you, literally could take you hours in a chat box. This is different. If you spend the time to learn what I'm talking about, this is so much more powerful. So enough jabbing at the jaw. So now we'll move on to the sessions flag, right? So we'll be doing fabric. And I'm pretty sure there's no short flag for this. There's only the session, the long form with an equal sign. And I know I'm pretty sure we have demo. And what this does, and we'll do the dry run first. Let's ask it, what were we talking about? And let's do the dry run first. So in this demo session, which starts here, the dry run would send the following. So apparently in this demo session, I had asked it, why is the sky blue? And then it put out this answer. Then I asked it to elaborate on scattering, and it answered with all of that. And then going back and forth, it just records everything up until this point where I put what was it we were even talking about. And it takes all of this. Well, apparently I had done that before because I'm just now asking again. So it takes the entire history of this conversation. And right here we have the raw query pattern. And then my most immediate question, the most immediate time that I asked this, what were we talking about? And this is what it would have sent to the LLM. And so if we were to run this for real, and let's change this to something more specific, let's say, tell me more. Now, because every time you do this, it adds more and more to the payload. As this builds, it can really start to bog down the response time here. And this is where, if your model has the capability, this is where you want to start elongating the model context length. And the model context length is a flag that comes up in the intermediate flags part 2. It's when you start to really build out and add a lot of text data to the payload you're sending. And one of the ways that really adds up is using the session flag. It happens pretty quick as you get into some deep discussions or explorations with this. So that's how you use that flag. Moving on, we have output session, which should, I think it outputs it to a file. So we will put in response.txt. Let's see if this works. Nope, that was not right. I will come back to this one. Let's try the -w, or it would be -- wipe context. This one does not have an equal sign, I don't think, but the short form, or the short flag, would be W. And so first, let's see which ones we have. We have a sample context right here. We'll see if we can wipe that one out successfully. And you see that the sample context is gone. Let's take a look real quick at what sessions we have. Now let's create a sample session. So you see you'll see here if a session doesn't exist already, it'll create the new session, and then it runs the pattern with in this case, the inline query, and it should save that to the session file. And we can, let's see if we can, let's list the sessions with the capital X. And so we have sample sessions right here. And now let's try and wipe it, delete it. That should be the capital W or -- wipe context. Sessions, sorry, -- wipe session, and we will check that with the capital X, and you see we just deleted it. So these are pretty simple to use, very, very simple to use. The list sessions and context, the wipe sessions and context, they're very simple, straightforward. The context and session flags themselves are very simple to use and unbelievably powerful, as we'll see in a future video. There's also the print context and print sessions, and that should and I believe there's only the long flags on these. Print context, and we will choose, only because I know it's there and it's simple to type, 7Ys. It just prints out to the terminal the contents of the 7Ys context file, which is all this, and that's accurate. That's how you use the print context, just to see what's inside of the context file. For obvious useful reasons, you might want to check out what that's about to do when you run it with the Fabric tool. And likewise, you would print the session. We have a demo session, and it prints out the entire demo session, which these can get very, very long. So you might see how long this is already. So what you might want to do is run that through a pager. The obvious one is less. There are better ones. You can set up BAT to be a pager. And when you run it like this, you can scroll up and down through it with a mouse or with your keyboard very easily. Q to quit. That's just a much better way, page up, page down. This is a much better way to parse long data like that. It's just piping it to a pager like less and there's much more useful, more sophisticated pagers that are out there or that you can build out. I'm thinking what this is the output session has to be used in conjunction with the output flag. The output flag specifies the file, and then output session adds it to it. That must be the mistake that we're making. working. I don't often use it, obviously. I'm pretty sure that's what we do, because I've had this working before. It just was quite a while ago. So if we were to engage a session, and we'll see if this runs, we should end up with a response text file in the home directory, because we're in the newbie username home directory. And it says it at least wrote this response to the response text file. And so we can see, we'll just take a look visually at the length of this. And we see the response text file, and you see right away, we're only 10% down the file. So this output, and I'm sorry, I should be using the GNOME text editor. But you can see this starts right at the beginning of whenever I created this demo sessions file. And it has way, way more than just the immediate question and response or request and response that we sent it and got back from it. Because what was output to the terminal was just from here, actually just from here, because the meta, it's kind of a nice little thing right here, this meta section that the session file that the session flag generates inside the session file. It shows you what you did. It doesn't give the whole fabric command, but it gives you the flags you used, the inline stuff that you ran. That helps you parse, when you're digging through these session files for an exact response, things like that. And in the future, when we do a deep dive into these context and session flags, not only is there so much to explore with the context feature, with the session feature, there's so much to explore, but it's in terms of extra functionality that we have to build on our own. In Bash or Python, we can build small scripts that parse the JSON data. See, this output is not in JSON, but if you go into the actual session file, let's travel over to that, and I'll show you what I mean real quick before we wrap this video up. In the sessions folder, the sessions files are JSONs. So if we actually take a look at one, it's not good because it runs it as one long string. This one line would string on forever. So a better way to look at this actually would be to look at it, because I think the GNOME text editor will wrap. I have an NVim set to not wrap the lines with the current size of the window, but in the GNOME text editor, it's automatically set to wrap. So this is the JSON format with the role content, role content, role content. This can be parsed programmatically, and not only parsed, but it can be traversed or searched or fuzzy searched programmatically in a much more pleasing way to the human eye. And so where this just looks like, in the terminal, this is what I call the white wall of vomit. In the GNOME text editor, they've got it. There's some coloring actually, which is nice to indicate where the different sections of the JSON format are. And, if we ran, you'll see pretty quick. I think it's JQ demo.json. I haven't used this in a while. Maybe it's okay. Yeah, you got to run the dot. But this really helps working in Bash, and you want to parse these session files, to just spit out all of the content of a JSON file, JSON session file. You would type if you have JQ installed, and that's just sudo apt install or apt-in if you use our aliases that we're going to build. JQ space dot space the name of the session JSON file. And it starts to give us a much better format for us to go through this dang thing and pick out the data. And then there's so much more that you can do with a couple tweaks of the JQ command, and then piping that to anything that like S menu or whatever. There's so many of them. D menu, all these. I mean, there's so many things you can do. It's crazy. You have to basically imagine what you want. And if you're not intimate with all these things, like JQ, all the tools to parse these JSON files, just imagine what you want and put it into ChatGPT. I harp on the chatbots all the time because I like the Fabric tool better. But sometimes it's just, if you're just asking a direct question, sometimes it's even for me, I keep ChatGPT, the chatbot interface, I keep it open on my desktop all the time. It's pretty normal. I'm definitely not saying never use it. That would be a ridiculous assertion. What I am saying is that you want to be a power user, you're going to learn to use the Fabric tool. It's just the way it is. I mean, it's a reality. You can almost say it's not opinion. This is nearly an objective, certain fact. You want to start using AI as a power user. It isn't going to be in a chat box. It's going to be using something like Fabric and other tools that are probably going to catch up with it. There's always competition out there, and they open sourced it. There's going to be other people that finally see the power of integrating a seamless system message library, which, the Fabric guys, they call it a pattern library or the pattern framework. There are other people are going to see the power of this. You could integrate it with this, and I'm sure they actually do. I know OpenWebUI has methods of introducing things like with a slash inside here, a slash command, and probably ChatGPT does too. And that works as far as it goes, but it can't use it programmatically in scripts and applications like you can when you have something like the Fabric tool, a command line tool, a terminal tool. That's where, if you get into scripting, most people call automation, it just explodes your potential and the use of AI to augment you, not replace you, but augment you. I like Daniel Miessler's idea of AI, using it like this with Fabric. It helps you narrow down in a sea of data to the data that you want, but you don't take the weights out of the gym. It helps you narrow down the ocean of data down to the stream that you're looking for. But then you still get in the gym, you still got to lift the weights. You still got to go through the videos or the chapters or whatever it is you've parsed with Fabric and its patterns. You still got to get in there and do the work. But the thing is, you've eliminated potentially, for me, oftentimes this is exactly and precisely true. You've eliminated 99% of the time kill, which is parsing the ocean for the stream you need or the stream you want. Again, as I always do, I'm beating this to death. Apologize. That's the context and session flags, listing contexts and sessions, outputting the session, wiping context and sessions, and printing context and sessions. This whole basic flags part 2 is really all about context and sessions and nothing but context and sessions. They're basic flags, but we are going to see the power of these things in a future video after we get through the rest of the intermediate level. These are how I consider the categorization of these things, the intermediate level and the advanced level flags. And then when we get into more broad topics, one of the first ones, maybe the first one, will be deep diving into these context and sessions. I promise you, I promise. I don't care who you are. You're going to say, okay, this is cool. I promise. It's just how it is. Sorry, I apologize for taking so long. We'll catch you in the next one.